is up, y'all? Happy weekend, happy Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully you guys are having a good day out there. And as always, if you are not having a good day, I hope that it gets better for you soon. So we are closing out AAPI month and we are moving into Pride month at the end of this week. If you have any recommendations for the highlight episode for the month of June, please let me know. Also, if you'd like to be in my highlight episode or if you have ideas for it, feel free to reach out. I love hearing from you guys. I love when you are like, hey, here's this cool thing I'm interested about. Maybe you could do an episode on it. Or, hey, here's something I think you should, do a deep dive on, do some research on. I love that. You know I'm here for it. I would love to have you on my show, and I know that everyone listening would love to hear your story too. No story or experience is too boring or mundane. Those are the most relatable, I think, and to be honest, we all have something unique to bring to the table. No one has lived our exact lives and has had our exact experiences, so there is something of value that you can bring to this audience. And looking ahead, after June, July is Disability Pride Month and also National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. So if any of those apply to you, feel free to reach out if you'd like to add your input. So I've been reading a lot lately, okay? Now that I finally have some freedom again, I can actually read for fun just because I want to, which is amazing, right? I love it. And it's so nice and relaxing to be able to have something that you can do for fun and you can just enjoy it again. If y'all are trying to get into reading, or if you're reading a lot right now, or just a little bit, feel free to add me on Goodreads. I love stealing y'all's book recommendations. So whatever y'all are reading, then I can see it and then I can add it to my want to be read list. I love that. I live for it. If you're not familiar with Goodreads, I really like it. It's like social media for readers, so you can list what books you've read, how many stars you rank them. You can do reviews on it. I never do reviews, but you can do reviews. You can track what you're currently reading, what you want to read. That's my favorite part of it, is because I'll see these amazing books all over and I'm like, ooh, I want to read that. But then if I don't write it down or put it somewhere, I completely forget all about it. So I track all my books that I want to read on Goodreads. And then, like I said, I see your guys's, because you can follow friends. You see what they're reading, what they're up to, and then I can steal from your want to be read list and I can steal from your currently reading list. A lot of fun. Highly recommend it. I also, because I'm a girl's girl, right? Like, I'll help y'all out. I use the Libby app. If you're military, you can put in your DoD ID and you get all of these free audiobooks and ebooks, just like a library. So you basically request them as they're available. You check them out, quote unquote, read them. I think you get 21 days or something, and then you return it at the end, check it back out again if you need longer, whatever. If you're not in the military, you just go through your local library. So I think you put in your zip code, whatever, and then you can just borrow and return audiobooks, ebooks, all that stuff for free. So, big fan. But yeah, I never used to listen to audiobooks, but now I listen to them a lot lately. When I'm nap trapped by the baby bean, when she's eating, I'm queen of multitasking, right? When I'm driving, doing chores, whatever. And so this topic for this episode on censorship, it's definitely not a new topic, right? I think everyone's kind of familiar with banned books. They kind of have a little bit of, I don't know, they kind of gives them a little bit of life to them, I think. I feel like if you told me a title and an author, I'd be like, okay, maybe interested, maybe not. But then if you're like, hey, here's this title and author of a book that's banned, I'm like, ooh, sign me up. Like, why are people hating on this book? What, there's just a little bit of novelness to it. I don't know. When someone says, pun intended, if y'all got that. When someone says like, hey, this book is bad, like we have to remove it from all the shelves. I don't know. You just pique my interest a little bit, right? But I want to talk about it. It's something that I haven't had a chance to explore yet on this podcast. And I also did just reread 1984 by George Orwell. So, which was like, it kind of stays on that continually banned list since it was written. And so let's get into it, right? Let's talk about censorship. The American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom, or OIF, they just released new data documenting book challenges throughout the United States, finding that challenges of unique titles surged 65% in 2023 compared to 2022 numbers. So that's insane. So something's happening, right? And they're kind of calling it like a war on libraries. I will post this video from a late night show that I saw on Instagram that kind of piqued my interest for this episode. I'll share it on Instagram like I always do. If you're not following me, side note, follow me on Instagram, because I'm really moving towards putting all of the podcast content on that page instead of my own page, just because I feel weird putting my podcast content in the same world, if you will, as my daughter. I don't know. Call me weird, but I just feel weird putting her out there for the entire world to see. So, but yes, 65% surge in book title challenges. So it's wild, right? This is the highest level ever documented by the ALA, the American Library Association. The OIF, Office for Intellectual Freedom, again from the ALA, OIF documented 4,240 unique book titles targeted for censorship, as well as 1,247 demands to censor library books, materials, and resources in 2023. And they found 4 key trends from all of this just from 2023 reports, right? First one, pressure groups in 23 focused on public libraries in addition to targeting school libraries. The number of titles targeted for censorship at public libraries increased by 92% over the previous year, accounting for about 46% of all book challenges in 2023. School libraries saw an 11% increase over 2022 numbers. So that's critical here, because maybe you kind of just tone that out and that's okay. So the big thing here is it's public libraries, not private libraries, not school libraries, not private school libraries. It's public libraries. This is supposed to be public domain for the entire, we'll get into it, but the key word there is public versus private, okay? The second trend that OIF found this past year was that groups and individuals demanding the censorship of multiple titles, often dozens or hundreds at a time, drove this surge. So they're coming in waves, right? It's not just like a onesie twosies. Third trend, titles representing the voices and lived experiences of LGBT and BIPOC individuals make up 47% of those targeted in censorship attempts. So this is definitely kind of like the perfect precursor to Pride Month. Fourth trend that they found was there were attempts to censor more than 100 titles in 17 states. So that's a huge flux coming from a very specific group of states. And those states were Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Idaho, Illinois, Iowa, Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, boo, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Virginia, and Wisconsin. So if you're kind of looking at that, just me pointing out trends there really are no coastal states. It's really just Midwest and South. So do with that information what you will. Emily Drabinski is the current 2023 to 2024 ALA president, and she said, quote, "Every challenge to a library book is an attack on our freedom to read. The books being targeted again focus on LGBTQ+ and people of color. Our communities and our country are stronger because of diversity. Libraries that reflect their community's diversity promote learning and empathy that some people want to hide or eliminate," unquote. And the foundational pillars of this discussion on censorship revolve around the First Amendment. Everything will, especially in the legal world, will go back to that First Amendment. And if you need a little refresher, that's okay, I got you. Quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances, unquote. That's the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, passed by Congress September 25th, 1789, ratified December 15th, 1791. Now, the Supreme Court and other courts have held conclusively that there is a First Amendment right to receive information as a corollary to the right to speak. The Supreme Court reaffirmed that the right to receive information is a fundamental right protected under the United States Constitution when it considered whether a local school board violated the Constitution by removing books from a school library. In that decision, the Supreme Court held that, quote, the right to receive ideas is a necessary predicate to the recipient's meaningful exercise of his own rights of speech, press, and political freedom, unquote. That is from Board of Education versus Pico, 1982. A side note, I don't know how I ended up on this train, but the amount of times I have cited references and quotes from the Supreme Court in the last, 2-3 episodes, this is wild. I don't know how I ended up here, but besides the point. Now, this is the part I'm most excited to share with y'all. So every year, ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom compiles a list of the top 10 most challenged books in order to inform the public about censorship in libraries and schools and whatever. And I'm going to share that list with you guys. So I'm very excited for this part. Now, this list, it's based on information from reports filed by the library professionals and the community members, as well as news stories that they get published throughout the US. So because many of these book challenges are not reported to the ALA or covered by the press, the top most challenged book list and the data compiled by ALA represent only a snapshot of these book challenges. And then, of course, just to keep in mind, a challenge to a book may be resolved in favor of retaining the book in the collection, or it can result in a book being restricted or withdrawn from the library. And I know a lot of this is very specific terminology and semantics. So after the list, I'll kind of walk us all through all of those definitions. But the number one for last year was Gender Queer by Maia Kobabe. And that was challenged for LGBTQ content, also claimed to be sexually explicit. Book number 2, All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. Again, challenged for LGBT content and claimed to be sexually explicit. Book number 3, This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson. Challenged for LGBTQ content, sex education, and claimed to be sexually explicit. So I think we're kind of seeing that trend here that all of those, that the ALA was seeing too. Book number 4, The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Chbosky, I think. Challenged for LGBTQ content, claimed to be sexually explicit, rape, drugs, profanity. Number 5, Flamer by Curato. Challenged for LGBTQ content and claimed to be sexually explicit. Number 6, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I love me some Toni, okay? This one was challenged for rape, incest, claimed to be sexually explicit, as well as EDI content, which is equity, diversity, and inclusion content. Book number 7 is Me and Earl and the Dying Girl by Jesse Andrews. This one was challenged for profanity and claimed to be sexually explicit. Book number 8 is Tricks by Ellen Hopkins, challenged for drugs, rape, LGBTQ content, and claimed to be sexually explicit. 9 is Let's Talk About It, The Teen's Guide to Sex, Relationship, and Being a Human by Erika, Moen, and Matthew Nolan, challenged for sex education, LGBT content, claimed to be sexually explicit. Book number 10, rounding out the list, we have Sold by Patricia McCormick, challenged for rape and claimed to be sexually explicit. Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. First off, let's start with some of the verbiage and the semantics, because like I said, there's terminology and just to kind of clear everything up there. So with a ban, obviously that's the removal of materials from a library based on the objection of a person or group. Censorship, limiting or removing access That's the key word there. Removing access to words, images, or ideas. The decision to restrict or deny access is made by a governing authority. This could be a person, group, or organization / business. Censorship by the government is illegal. Now, when we have a challenge, that is an attempt to have a library resource removed or access to it restricted based on the objections of a person or group. The collection development policy, you'll see that a lot in this conversation as well, because that's how a lot of these public libraries go about how they choose which books to order, which books to stock, and which ones not to stock. And obviously, as you can kind of piece together, that collection development policy could easily be sort of basically censorship without the legal ramifications of technically being censorship. So they can say, the head librarian at a public library could say, oh, well, no one wants to read this book, so I'm not going to order it. When in reality, they just don't agree with what that book contains. And so they just will not order that, even if it's, the number one bestseller, whatever the case may be. So collection development policy, the ALA's official definition of that is the guidelines libraries use for the selection, purchasing, and deselection of materials. So they can say, hey, no one is getting this book. We're going to stop carrying it. That's deselection. Now, when it comes to another term that's thrown out a lot when we're looking at this conversation of censorship is whether it's harmful to minors. So sexually explicit materials that adults have a legal right to access, if they lack any serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors, that would be considered harmful to minors, even if it is sexually explicit, and that's perfectly fine for adults. It is illegal to knowingly distribute these materials to any minor. The fact that a work has topics addressing sex or contains sexual content does not make the material, quote, harmful to minors. Whether materials are considered harmful to minors is determined by a court using the same 3-part test for obscenity. And going into obscenity, that it goes back into the legal realm again. So sexually themed speech or expressive materials that are not protected by the First Amendment would be obscenity or obscene materials. The legal test for obscenity includes the following criteria. Number 1, whether the average person applying contemporary community standards would find that the work taken as a whole appeals to prurient interest. And that just simply means, quote, a shameful or morbid interest in nudity, sex, or excretion, and is reflective of an arousal of lewd and lascivious desires and thoughts. Number 2, whether the work depicts or describes in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by the applicable state law. And number 3, whether the work taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Only a judge or jury can find that a work is legally obscene. And this dips into pornography, right? So written or visual materials that are designed to cause sexual excitement is the ALA's official definition of pornography. Under U.S. law, pornography has no legal definition, though. So instead, courts and legislatures identify illegal sexually themed content as obscenity, which is defined by statute in federal and state law. Now, some of the common Q&As on the ALA website that gives a lot of information about censorship, what's legal, what's not, what the current status of our country is looking like today for censorship in public libraries, in private libraries, in schools, all that stuff. So I picked out a few of the questions that I thought were really good to know and kind of cleared up a lot of things. So the first one that I want to do is, can some censorship be legal? And here's ALA's official answer. Private entities can determine what materials they will or will not disseminate. Do not confuse this with censorship as it applies to government entities. There are currently attempts in some states to legalize government censorship through the passage of bills that restrict teaching and learning activities. Though geared towards teaching, these laws can also affect school and academic libraries. Another question they had posted was, what's the difference between selection and censorship? So selection is following a collection development policy, like we talked about earlier. Library workers use their expertise to select items for the community they serve. There are various constraints and factors that library workers consider when they are purchasing materials for their community's collections. Censorship occurs when a library worker strays from that collection development policy to not select certain materials based on personal beliefs or fear of controversy. And so one thing, if your brain is feeling a little fuzzy right now with all of that, and you're like, wait, Maggie, you say censorship by the government is illegal, but we have all of these challenges and bans on books since the dawn of time, basically. How is that legal, but censorship is technically illegal? So here's where it gets really crazy, because a person or a group, but it can just be a person, and especially if there's multiple people that agree, 100 individual people can say, Public Library A, we don't like The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. We think it's bad for the public, it's bad for the kids, it's grooming the kids, it's inappropriate, you librarians are pedophiles, so on and so forth. We want to challenge this book, Stop Carrying the Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Okay, but that's technically a person against Public Library A. And if that challenge on the Bluest Eye, if that is approved, then Public Library A would have to remove and stop carrying the Bluest Eye in Public Library A. Censorship in this example would look like the president or whoever, anyone in the US government, them saying, hey, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison is bad. We don't like it. No one can print it. No one can read it. No one can distribute it. No one can sell it. Basically, you're like eliminating and just burning every single copy, like 0 copies of The Bluest Eye anywhere. Illegal to buy it, illegal to distribute it, illegal to print it. That is technically, in the legalized true censorship, is just completely removing access to that book. And that is what's illegal. But you see where that gray area is, because if everyone challenged The Bluest Eye at every public library, at every school, I mean, is it unlikely that you're going to hit every single, distributor, bookstore seller, every distributor, every school, all that? Yes. But technically, legally, that would be possible. So then at what point do we say, okay, this book is banned in too many places, this is teetering on true censorship, so now we gotta reel it back? Or also, what's the point of saying, okay, you can still print The Bluest Eye, you can still try to distribute it, but no one's gonna buy it? I mean, that's silly. No one's gonna buy it from these bookstores because bookstores aren't allowed to stock them. So then how would the people get the books? It's a hot mess. But you see where that issue in general as a whole of censorship is, right? I don't know. I also think it's very interesting to me because it kind of shows just how important the written word is and just how important our language is, even in our fiction, in our novels, in the content that artists write every single day. If it's so significant and important that it's, we have to ban it and censor it and all that, I don't know. I think it's kind of encouraging. That's like, hey, the words you write, the stories you tell, they do actually have impact. They do actually have meaning. And maybe right now, the public as a whole doesn't see the importance of it, but that story is in you to tell for a reason. Besides the point. Now, I do want to add, just to be fair, on the flip side of this conversation, I understand y'all are probably thinking, Maggie, so you're all for, kids having access to LGBTQ content and blah, blah, blah. But if it was religious content, you wouldn't be saying the same message. And I see you there, right? Like I see I can understand that. Like, I do understand the slight where it can appear like a double standard, because I say, oh yeah, let's have kids, let them have free reign over whatever content they want. We shouldn't limit them, blah, blah, blah. But then I think you guys all know probably how I feel and say, no, like, don't push religious beliefs onto my kid in a public school. If I wanted them religious, A, I would raise them to be religious, and B, I would probably put them in a religious private school. But I don't want that belief, right? So if I send my kid to a public school, I would expect a public education which has that freedom from religion, right? And so I see that. I do think that it's a little bit different though, because a library, the books are sitting there, and if a kid sees something that they're interested in and grabs it and then checks it out and then reads it themselves and it has, queer content in it, then okay. But I think it gets a little bit weird if teachers are assigning reading, if they're reading it in homeroom, if they're reading it openly, where they're more actively pushing some of this content down kids' throats and saying it as a fact versus this is another opinion or something of that nature. I think that's where it's different. Because for me, kids seeing and reading transgender content, let's say, in a library because they picked up the book, again, and they chose to check out that book and they chose to read that book, then to me, that's different from them being in a public classroom and a teacher saying, let's read some content from the Bible because this is the truth. This is the word of God. To me, that's different. Again, I'll add the disclaimer. What do I know? My kids aren't in school yet. So things may change. My opinion may change. But right now, that's just kind of how I see it. I do see it as two separate things. Are some books absolutely inappropriate for kids? Sure, absolutely. But you know what I'm going to do when my kid starts reading books on her own? If I'm worried about her, if I'm like, I don't know if I trust the content you're reading, maybe you're at an age where you might be getting into some spicy books, but I'm not ready for you to read spicy books yet. You know what I'm going to do? If it's a book I'm not familiar with, or if I'm worried about it, I'm going to look into it and be like, hey, what book is that? What book are you reading? Let me look through it. Let me flip through it. Let me read the reviews. Let me read what it's about. Best case scenario, if I'm able to, let me read it too along with you or before you and kind of approve it. And if it's got spicy content or adult content that I just don't feel comfortable with her reading yet, I'm going to sit her down and say, hey, I don't feel comfortable with you reading this yet. I think you're too young. I think it's too soon. This is adult content, and I don't want you reading this material for these reasons, X, Y, and Z. I mean, I don't know. That's what I'm going to do. I feel like parents, if you are religious, if you don't believe in some of these things, if you would feel more comfortable with your child not reading that content, to me, the answer is talk to your kid about that and say, hey, not everyone believes the same things, and that's okay. This is not what we believe in this household. I don't want you reading this type of content for these reasons. I don't think the answer is let's get the book banned because I don't like it. Let's look at religious content. If you're Catholic, okay, cool. Read Catholic materials. The answer is not ban the Quran. The answer is not ban some of these other religious books of other religions. Just if you don't like it, don't read it. I guess that's really what it comes down to, is if you don't like it, don't read it. But the answer is not, the book itself is not evil. The book itself is not inherently bad. The book itself doesn't deserve to be banned. It's just, I don't know, if you don't like it, don't read it. And I recently watched Midnight Mass on Netflix, which, by the way, is super good. You guys should watch it. If you want to, or not, whatever. But there was this really cool scene in there, and it fits perfectly with this conversation. There is a tiny little town on the coast, very isolated island, very, very, very religious and Catholic. It ends not well. I mean, the show ends well, but it doesn't end well for the villagers, I mean. But where I'm going with this, there's a sheriff who's an outsider. He is also Muslim. He has a son who's also Muslim. The kid is going to the public school with these other, 12 children on the island. They're all Catholic. And so he's like, hey, Dad, like, all my friends are Catholic. Like, the cool place to be is a Catholic church right now. Like, can I check it out? And the dad, 10 out of 10, best dad I've ever seen on TV. He's so cool. Just like epitome of best dad ever. He was like, hey, I'm getting kind of nervous of you, son, because you're kind of falling into like a peer pressure type deal. But he was like, listen, I encourage you to look at other religions. Like, he was like, Islam is the true religion and blah, blah, blah. But he was like, I encourage you to, if you want to read about the Catholic Church, go ahead. Like, if you want to explore other religions, I support that. He was like, I did the same thing. And that'll, drive you to the correct one, essentially, is what he was saying. And then things start popping off in the town. It's getting very culty. The sheriff is seeing a lot of red flags in a lot of different scenarios. He comes home one day, the kid's got a Bible in his backpack, and he's like, I want to go to midnight mass on Easter. And so the dad was like, whoa, like, why are you, like, whatever. He looks into it. You see him at this, like, parent-teachers association meeting, and he's like, hey, I don't have an issue with my son exploring other religions. My issue is that he goes into a public school and you are reading the Bible to him in homeroom. You are assigning the Bible as homework. You're doing this stuff. You're giving him a Bible to read that he has to take home. Like, that is not public education with freedom and liberties. Like, you are now pushing your religion as the correct one onto my son. And he was like, that's where the line is. And I think that's fair. I think that was a really good point. If you guys want to check out that scene or that show, I highly recommend it. I say go for it. And now one thing that I do want to get into deeper here is sexually explicit content, okay? I do think it should be identified somehow, maybe not on the book, because then that's going to be messy on the cover and just not aesthetic to look at, but somehow in the display in the library, something like that. Because to each their own. There is definitely an audience and a huge wave of popularity in spicy books right now. And I do feel like most bookstores I've been in, they do a pretty good job of, like, they'll put them together on a display with, like, fire emojis or, like, varying number of pepper emojis to indicate the spice level, which is good. I think that's very helpful. Because some people like spicy content, some people don't. Again, to each their own. But you know what the other thing was that I thought of when I saw so many books on this list from last year being challenged for being potentially sexually explicit? I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, okay, are they obscene and spicy? Is it just spicy content? Or are they just openly discussing anatomy? You know what I mean? Like, I need to see what exactly they're stating is explicit, because I've talked about this before, but sex education is not good, right? Like, we're not doing a good job of it. Hopefully we can all kind of agree on that. It's not where it should be. It seems like it sets us back in a few different ways overall because we aren't properly educated about some of this stuff. And I'm not saying we should be guiding our kids to be sexually active at the ripe old age of 9, but at some point, I do think we should be open and honest and helpful about sexual education. Like, I don't want to get too off topic here, but there has been a lot of data, and I've seen a lot of information about how teaching kids to use accurate anatomical terms, like not saying pee-pee or my private stuff, but literally saying my vagina, my penis, and how it minimizes feelings of shame, it decreases the probability of sexual abuse, increases the likelihood that children will seek medical attention as needed, no matter what the concern is. And I also saw that children who are taught correct body terms are more likely to speak up quickly in the instance of sexual assault, and they'll be able to more accurately outline the trauma for the judicial system, which will then ensure an accurate verdict and all of that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, to each their own and what their comfort levels are, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like sex ed is good, and I think it's important, and I think it's helpful. And so, yeah, some of these books, like book number 9 that was challenged last year, Let's Talk About It, The Teen's Guide to Sex, Relationship, and Being a Human. That sounds, just off the title, that sounds like a helpful book. Like, I would not say, that sounds like it's exactly entirely sex ed. And so I don't see how sexually explicit would really fit in there. That doesn't sound, you know what I mean? This isn't like 50 Shades of Grey or Coho. Like, this is literally, let's talk about sex. You're a teenager. So realistically, the kids are going to make these decisions for themselves. Hopefully, fingers crossed, they're making the decision for themselves. But you kind of can't hide from it forever. And so wouldn't you rather your kid be educated before it happens versus after it happens? I don't know. Again, I can't truly speak. I can only speak from my perspective right now before my kid is at that age. So I'm saving an open space for maybe I do change my mind. Maybe I learn things differently down the road. Who knows? Maybe I'll feel differently. I'm open to that. I'm just saying right now, my perspective, is it the worst thing in the world if our daughter knows that she has a vagina? I mean, sure, when you're in sex ed, when you're in biology class as a teenager, you're going to get the giggles when you see a drawing of boobs in your book. Yes, like that's going to happen. Kids are going to be kids, right? But there's nothing sexy about anatomy, to be honest. You know what I mean? Like, if you're truly giving a good sex ed, you're talking about zygotes and you're talking about, vas difference. Like, it's not like they're reading 50 Shades of Grey and you're not watching pornography. You're reading and listening and learning about boring anatomy. Like, I don't think it's quite as explicit and spicy and, sensuous as conservative people maybe want to make sex ed seem. Like, it's not like training them to be porn stars. It's not that dramatic. It's really just saying, hey, this is what it is. It's kind of just science, and there's nothing sexy about science. Sorry to all my STEM majors out there, but it's just not, right? I don't know. That's my take. That is my perspective on censorship. And I would love to hear your guys' take on this episode, on this content. If you have anything that you want to add in, if you're anything like, nah, listen, I need to get this off my chest because you were so far left on this, so on and so forth, I'd love to hear it. And with that, I will close out this episode. As always, make good choices, be a decent human being, take care of each other. If you don't like it, don't read it. And yeah, I will catch y'all next time. Okay, bye!